It's your choice whether you want to do it or not.
Just as John Williams does it, although a slightly different version. A slightly slowed down version, which might go...
Hello and welcome to Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast exploring arts and cultural production. I'm Paula Blair, and I'm joined this time by Dr. Andrew Shail to talk about Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, directed by J.J. Abrams and released in 2019. Many thanks to members at patreon.com/AV Cultures for your continued and much appreciated support. The podcast is free to access but not to make and distribute. Please do listen until the end to find out more ways to be part of Audiovisual Cultures. For now though, enjoy the discussion.
So Blair, what did we do on Boxing Day 2019?
We had leftover dinner and we went to see The Rise of Skywalker. For the benefit of anybody who might be listening, who maybe isn't a regular listener, we did an episode quite a while ago on Solo. Let's see, I'm just looking it up in my ledger. It's episode 32, when we looked at Solo, a Star Wars story. I've also had Becca Harrison on as a guest, who is, I think it's very safe to say, is an expert in the Star Wars movie franchise and beyond.
Yep.
That was episode 42. So, I, Paula Blair, am not a Star Wars fan, but to recap, I really enjoyed Rogue One as a standalone action movie. I thought it was largely done really well.
Yep.
And I really enjoyed 2 years ago The Last Jedi. And so those are respectively directed by Gareth Edwards and Rian Johnson. And I just really enjoyed Knives Out. It was written and directed by him. And that's been out recently as well. Those two have been the films I have most enjoyed. And those two have seemed to be the films that have upset, especially The Last Jedi, upset hardcore fans the most. You're more of a fan, Andrew.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's safe to say that you've been a lifelong fan.
Yeah, I mean, all the way from having the first generation of the toys when I was a kid, and there were two very distinct generations of the little figurines. When I was a kid, I had the first generation ones. Through playing computer games, played X-Wing a lot in the 90s. Through really caring about the prequels, to making this my priority as soon as we could get to the Tyneside. But we've got roughly equal knowledge about the franchise now. You've been kind of vicariously boned up. That might not be the right term.
No, I don't. I think you're being very generous with me because I haven't cared enough to remember a lot of stuff.
Quite right.
Honestly, because now I've been seeing a lot of stuff on social media. Becca, who I mentioned, wrote a review of the film for Sight and Sound, which I'll link on our socials because it's quite a useful read to get us up to speed, but also her Twitter is really useful because she's led quite a lot of discussions on The Rise of Skywalker specifically because there are problems with the film. There's been a lot of backlash, I think, from fans. I'm not fully up to speed. I think look into it if you're interested in that other area of fandom. But I think there was a major backlash from The Last Jedi because Rian Johnson just took things and really did his own thing. He made a really, I thought, really fantastic action movie. He took some what would have normally been really marginal characters and really made something out of them. So characters like Rose. She was my favourite character of The Last Jedi. And a lot of people who call themselves Star Wars fans hated her to the point where they were abusing Kelly Marie Tran online. But I just thought she was a really fantastic character, and that's been one thing I didn't enjoy about Rise of Skywalker was how little she's used, and she's rendered down to, I feel like in her character, a lot other characters have really progressed things, but in her it's really backtracked because she's been demoted, it feels, to just this moving on the plot character of, but what are we going to do? And Oh, but Finn's still up there.
Just a bit of saying the plot here.
Just a bit of exposition and letting other characters know what other characters have done. And it felt really just, and there was, maybe a half a second of her running heroically towards something, and it just wasn't enough. It really bothered me what happened with her. But anyway, but that's a whole other thing. But I really liked, I suppose, a lot of the rogue elements in Last Jedi that seemed to have disappeared again in Rise of Skywalker. But I quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed sitting watching the film. Honestly, I felt the time go in. I felt every minute we were sitting there.
All right.
There were stretches where I thought, well, this could move a bit faster. This screenwriting's a bit clunky here. I felt like there were plot elements that just could have been tightened up a lot more. So, it's sort of in review territory here. But then again, I feel like, well, it's a Hollywood action movie, so there will be some of that. And I think I've been watching a lot of really economical film and television lately, so I notice it, I think, a bit more when it feels a bit baggy, when things could have been cut and haven't been. I appreciate it when it's really all the dead weight's shaken out of something. I really appreciate it.
I found myself, from the moment the title crawl began right to the moment when the end credits started rolling, I found myself oblivious of the time. It had momentum. It may well have been 2.5 hours, but I have no idea how long we were actually watching the movie for. That, at least, it had going for it. I say at least, like we're going to give it some stick now. As you said on the way out, it's not as good as The Last Jedi.
I didn't think so.
But as I said on the way out, it's really up there.
It is up there. I mean, that's the thing, I suppose, for me to put in context for my reception of it. I didn't watch the original trilogy until quite recently with you, so in the last few years I've watched it. So I was in my 30s, I've gone through all my life, and I had planned to never watch it. It was never a priority for me to ever watch it, but I watched it because you're a major fan and you wanted to watch it with me and that sort of thing, so I went for it. And honestly, when I watched those, I thought, well, Leia is a lot cooler than I had ever perceived, and a lot cooler than what I knew about Star Wars was mainly through parodies of it. So Leia was a lot more complex than my perception of her from having not seen the film, so that was nice. Other than that, I really just didn't care. I don't find them particularly memorable. They're not movies I would ever clamour to rewatch. Fine, I've done it. Then the trilogy in the 1990s, so The Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith, and
Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith.
Right, so I never managed to watch those. I did try when they came on TV, but I found them horrifically boring, and I just couldn't get into them at all.
They are really boring. There's a point about midway through the third one where it becomes clear that the whole point of these films is just to get the average viewer to a point where they can see off in the distance the original trilogy. And so there's masses of people doing expository dialogue. The expository dialogue's in the mouths of the wrong people. There's really far-fetched stuff that's completely unmotivated. It's all just to do with what this is going to bring about, what's going to be the aftermath of all of this. There were some interesting bits in there, I suppose. It was a trilogy made without considering what were the key elements of the original that would need to be duplicated. Now, what we've just seen was a trilogy made with really close eye on the original trilogy. Almost as if it was trying to distract us from the existence of the prequels. I was thinking during the final battle in this one, and we are going to give away plot moments, aren't we? I don't call them spoilers because it doesn't spoil the movie to know what happens in it. But we're going to give away plot moments. During the climactic battle where the Emperor is just sitting there watching this really one-sided battle, which it looks like it's nearly over and that the Resistance are going to lose, and he's got the unwilling Jedi next to him who he's trying to turn to the dark side, who he's trying to make kill him. That was just essentially taken from the climax of Return of the Jedi. It's this, I've maneuvered you into a corner kind of climax where the enemy is saying, if you don't kill me, then you lose this battle. If you do kill me, it'll turn you to the dark side. And Luke in Return of the Jedi just can't do anything. There's no third option until I think it's Darth Vader gives him a third option. So it's you lose or you lose. That was duplicated again in this, just ever so slightly changed, where if in this one the Emperor's got himself to the point where if you kill him, he doesn't die. His spirit just goes into your body. A power he didn't seem to have in the original trilogy, but that's the only change. Rey's basically told you have to kill me, and then I'll go into your body and we'll be.
It's a bit creepy.
Yeah.
Given that turns out it's his granddaughter.
Yes. No, I didn't see that coming. That reveal was kind of, that Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter by Palpatine's son.
Yeah.
And there's no introduction of any kids of Palpatine in any of the original
Right.
6, the original 3 movies or any of the prequels. So it was a bit of a surprise.
Now that was something I did know about because I had seen it, because every time I went on social media to look at other things, I just encountered it and people were talking very openly about this, so there was no spoiler filter. But I didn't know what it meant because I didn't really know who the Emperor was. I forgot.
So when we were playing movie trivia the other day,
Yeah.
and one of the questions was, what's the name of the Emperor in the original Star
That
Wars
was when
trilogy?
it made sense.
You're asking me the question and I knew the
Yeah.
answer, and it's Palpatine.
I wouldn't if you'd asked me the question, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. And people were saying Palpatine, but I didn't necessarily know who that was.
And that's the moment when you started keeping a secret from me.
Well, I didn't want to spoil a movie for you, especially when I figured, given that you are a fan, and people were saying it was a really big deal, so I didn't want to spoil that for you.
Well, next time... Next time you, without your consent, get informed about something by the internet, because the internet likes to do that to you. Don't worry, just tell me. It won't spoil the movie.
Aww.
Because knowing the plot doesn't spoil the movie. Or at least that's the experiment I want to try, because it might turn out that I go, no.
Well, there are plenty of movies I have told you what happens. But you see, there were discussions, and I don't know, I got enthralled by these discussions that were happening on Twitter, because I think a lot of people were upset because the whole point about Rey before was that she was nobody, and that the message of the films was that you could come from nothing and become something really special.
Yeah.
I think emotionally that meant a lot for a lot of people, that you didn't have to be descended from a specific line to become something.
And that last couple of minutes, seconds even, of The Last Jedi was, there's this little boy, he's working in a stable in this planet, which we've briefly seen for one scene, and instead of picking up a broom, he just kind of force sucks it to his hand. So there's this hint of, there's a whole new generation of Jedi who are about to emerge, and it really doesn't matter what their parentage is. This movie went, no.
Yeah, it does matter.
Totally matters what your parentage is. To the extent that, as I was thinking through as we were cycling home, it's important that your listeners know that we did not drive. I was figuring this out because, okay, so in the form of Palpatine, this is somebody who, at least according to the canon, was from a very noble family on Naboo, was Chancellor of the entire planet of Naboo, and then made himself Chancellor of the entire Galactic Senate, and then made himself Emperor. So this is somebody who had status, and at the same time was also a Sith Lord, secretly. His Sith name is Darth Sidious. So Rey's descended from him, so her parentage is what has given her these powers. And then with the character who, for part of the movie we're calling Kylo Ren, and for part of the movie we're calling Ben Organa Solo, his being a Jedi goes back to his great-grandmother, who was called, what was Anakin Skywalker's mum called?
Was that, she was played by Natalie Portman, is that who
No,
that
we're going
is?
back another generation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you see her for just a little bit in a couple of the prequels. Shmi Skywalker, something like that. And she explains that when she had Anakin Skywalker, it was a virgin birth. It was like she was impregnated by the spirits who give you Jedi power. And so it goes her, giving birth to Anakin. Anakin's two kids are Luke and Leia. And then Ben is seemingly Leia's only kid. And so there's these two quite distinguished, we can do magic lineages going on there. And, the assertion of that just seems to completely cancel out. Particularly as there's no other person doing any Force stuff apart from Rey, Ben, and the Emperor in the entire film. There's people doing lots of martial arts stuff, but there's nobody else doing Force stuff. And I suppose that's in part because Rey has to be completely alone. Oh, actually, sorry, Leia does a bit, doesn't she? She does just a little bit of Force stuff and then dies from it.
It's her last act, really, isn't it? She reaches out to her son. She distracts him long enough for Rey to overcome him. So, in a way, I didn't know how to feel about that because she's helping out, but it also implies that Rey couldn't beat him alone.
Yes, Rey was losing that fight.
Yeah.
The fighting style, while we're on fighting, in these films is interesting because there's quite a samurai fighting style around the prequel Jedi. In the original trilogy Jedi, the fighting style is we're just going to wave swords at each other. In the very first one, the lightsaber battle between Kenobi and Darth Vader is just pokey-pokey. Then by the third one, it's become really big chopping movements. By the prequels, they fought like samurai. And then by this one, they seem to be using their weapons like medieval foot soldiers.
They're like broadswords.
Where it's like a two-handed sword, and you are turning it around and using it so that the pommel sticks out the top of your hand and the sword itself sticks out the bottom.
Yeah, you could use
and
it as a guard, to swipe at it.
And this is great audio, isn't it?
Let's show you how it's done.
Where you put the blade around behind you and then you kind of swing your arm around so that the blade follows your arm. I remember seeing a documentary once about medieval sword fighting instruction books, and it showed that there was a half of what medieval foot soldiers would do, who had these big two-handed swords, was hitting people with the pommel. Rather than trying to slice things or poke things, just knocking somebody really hard, particularly if they're wearing armour. But the pommel of your weapon is probably more useful than using the blade. So there's lots of using all of the ends of the weapon. So they had Kylo Ren being awesome because he does that, and that's the way he fights. There's kind of a draggy feel to the way that he fights. This is somebody who's pushing against something. And I suppose that's part of this lengthy motif. This is one scene where engine backwash is pushing over all of these stormtroopers, and Kylo Ren is the one who's able to withstand it. And then, of course, finally, when he decides to stop being Kylo Ren to become Ben Organa Solo again, that is him finally pushing so hard against the forces that have been shaping who he is that he takes back his original name. It's detailed in that sense that the physical imagery does fit with the character's motives and circumstances. And I suppose detail overall is a really fundamental part of doing a Star Wars film. Now, I cannot remember who did this. I think it might have been Tom Schoen in his book Blockbuster, but that's a guess. I remember reading somewhere someone saying that one of the distinguishing characteristics of the original Star Wars film, that was just called Star Wars, was garbage. This was a universe that was old, that had a waste processing industry, and lots of different waste processing industries, and where characters would have to wade through garbage to get their job done. And it happens with the droids at the beginning. They become refuse. They get knee-deep in garbage on the little Jawa thing. And then the characters later on get into one of the garbage compactors on the Death Star. And so this is a garbagey sci-fi universe, a world away from A Space Odyssey. That definitely has been a part of this new trilogy of sequels. This is a universe which is full of stuff. People's lives have got wreckage, and they've got history and backstory, and there's lots of stuff just lying around. In fact, when characters are pushing aside stuff for the 5th time in the film, and then they go, oh look, there's an interesting bit of stuff there, and they kind of push a button, and that then becomes the most relevant bit of stuff for the rest of the film. And in this case, it was a little tiny droid that turned out to be a really relevant piece of stuff. You do tend to think, hang on, what have we missed? The person noticed that bit of stuff as relevant. What about the 100 things they didn't look at closely on the way to go and do this? That's one of the things that we ought to acknowledge. We do tend to listen to Mark and Simon quite a lot. And one of the things that Mark pointed out as being something quite computer gamey about this film, where there's lots of people trying to find objects. And then when they found that object, they have to go and find another object. So there's this treasure quest thing going on, but where the objects are really unlikely, they're quite absurd. What you get with the object is not really worth it. There's just an oddness of how object-centered people's quests are in this. And in both Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, it did strike me as odd that the object they were after in both was an object that would show you the way to somewhere. It was a map fragment in The Force Awakens, and it was a thing called a wayfinder in Rise of Skywalker. So about 2/3 of the film was spent with Rey and company.
It's a treasure map, isn't it?
Yeah, looking for a treasure map, which just shows you where a planet is. And then when the one she's after actually gets destroyed, and I failed, she then just nicks somebody else's and does it anyway. So rendering most of what she just spent the last hour of screen time doing pointless. That did all seem quite strained, that people were risking their lives in these constant efforts to try to find a map, rather than, find a certain sort of crystal that powers a certain weapon that they can use to defend themselves. Nothing like that. It's just this little crew of people trying to find a map, without any knowledge that when they find the map and then follow the map to where they would need to go, that what they're looking for will be there. It's just, that's the last place we saw this person. And so, of course they'll still be there. They'll have just been waiting for us for 30 years. And just the existence of, the clue that they found to where the map was being held. The clue was a map to the map. That clue was a dagger which had a a little crossguard with little things that you could pull out of a crossguard. That would show you things from a certain
It was really
viewpoint.
specific as
Yeah.
well. It turning out that it was the silhouette of the broken up Death Star that had landed on a planet. I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, wasn't the Death Star the size of a planet? And second of all,
It was the size of a moon, but
but some
yeah.
planets are smaller than some moons.
Well,
I mean,
actually, this is nerd stuff. In the Return of the Jedi, the Emperor refers to Endor as the Century Moon. He calls it a moon. It seems to be orbiting a big planet going around the sun in the system. So it may be actually that Endor wasn't the main planet in Return of the Jedi. That Endor is just the moon going around that planet. Because I was sitting there going, oh, they're going back to Endor. There's going to be Ewoks. But no, they were actually I think they were on the planet around which the moon of Endor, the Century Moon, orbits, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that did make the Death Star seem like a tiny little house that was kind of washed up on a beach.
But also, the shape of it was the exact silhouette of the wreckage.
Mm-hmm.
But that had happened a long time before they got there, so surely it would have broken up more.
Yes.
How can you...
In some cases, it seemed like the whole original trilogy stuff had happened about 10 years beforehand. In some cases, it seemed like it happened 100 years beforehand. That was really unclear. When Wedge Antilles turns up in the climactic battle, played by the guy who originally played Wedge Antilles.
Dennis Law.
And I didn't notice, and you pointed it out.
Yeah.
And Wedge Antilles, yeah.
Well, I recognised Dennis Law, and I thought, well, he's obviously been in the original ones.
And we have Lando Calrissian still in it as well. So human lifespans, people who are supposed to have lived through the original events, and so it's actually as long ago as the release of the original films was for us. That's effectively the way it works, isn't it? If you're going to continue to use these same people, it has to be that long ago. So that the Death Star has been lying in the ocean on that planet for 35 years, which is a long time.
Yeah, especially if you're on a planet where there are people who are escaped stormtroopers, people who've been enslaved as children to grow up as stormtroopers, and they've escaped and they're living on this place as scavengers. Surely they'd have broken it up to the point where it wouldn't be that shape anymore.
I mean, the sea?
The sea
that
alone?
was amazing.
Because that was a rough sea. I should have had that thing in bits.
Yeah, it was a character, that sea. I cannot find the name of the character who was the ex-stormtrooper. Do you remember her name? I'm looking through a cast list which contains a bucket load of stuff. Because, it's every officer,
I know when I say it. She's quite far to the top, though. See if I still have... I was looking everybody up earlier.
Poor Donald Gleeson.
Donald Gleeson felt more like a cameo this time. He was in it so little. I felt like that about quite a few people.
I can't find it. Warwick Davis was in it.
Yeah.
As Wicket. Reprising his original... one of his many, I assume,
He's been
roles.
he's been in loads of different people, hasn't he, in Star Wars?
And whoever that character was, that seemed to be a replacement for Rose in Finn's Affections.
I know, yeah.
And because she was of recent African origin, it seemed implicitly to be saying this is who Finn should be with because he's John Boyega, which little suspicious.
And that Lando is the one who talks to her at the end. She says, I don't know where it came from originally. He says, well, let's find out. It's Naomi Aki playing Jana.
Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. Missed it. Yeah, she basically replaces Rose.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit of a shame. Because Jana's character is great, but it's just Rose was also really great. And it just felt that, there was such a strong connection between Rose and Finn in The Last Jedi.
She saves his life.
She saves his life, and they're really emotional about it. And they build up a bit of a, because they begin with an antagonistic relationship that very quickly becomes a friendship, where they're annoyed with each other and they rib each other a bit, mostly her to him, and she's so efficient at her job, she needs order. Her role in Last Jedi, it shone a light on the lesser jobs. I'm saying that in scare quotes because these are all really important things that need to be done, because she's protecting the ship from deserters. She has to deal with these people. She's trying to maintain this order and she has process. And these are all important things to do. Yeah, I just felt like the functions of her are just really put by the wayside again, and it was a shame because even the Resistance needs administrators and, people who are on the ball and just making sure that the order's kept.
There were plenty of nods to the general administrative crew of the Resistance in this, including quite an extensive scene when people were getting in ships to go off to this big climactic battle, where it was clear that there was lots of people who'd been working together for years, and there was lots of high-fiving. And
they made it really clear that there's lots of friendships and relationships of all kinds.
And then, of course, when they get back, there's lots of hugging as well. And that's where they had the same-sex kiss.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
Which the Singaporean market has not seen. You know, it's understandable that distribution companies go, oh, right, so the classification people in that country would give it this rating. We have a choice to make. Do we just accept that rating, or do we cut it to get a lower one and thereby widen the market that this can get to? And that the executives of the company do some sums and go, well, if we want to make a profit in that market at all, we basically have to go for the lower rating. So that, you know, their hands are being forced, but it's shit that their hands are being forced in the first place.
But it just feels a bit like throwing a certain community under the bus, because the rest of us need to make a stand and say this is totally normal, and this needs to come to a point where we're not batting an eyelid anymore. And it treated it like that in the shot because it wasn't a big focus. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? There's not a huge amount of kissy business in Star Wars anyway, so this film had a lot of it compared to a lot of the other films, because it did have quite a climactic moment with Rey and Ben.
I thought if they don't kiss now, there's going to be so much tension, both of them will just die from tension. So when they did, I thought, oh, okay, fine, that's good. Someone's kissed someone finally. Because there's a whole lot of people not kissing in really tense moments in this trilogy. But then he dies.
Because he's just given what's left of his life force to her. Yeah. It was either them kiss and he die, and she, you know, they could go back and forth forever, just giving each other their life force. And somebody may as well live, so she decides to go with it.
Like Rose on that bit of wreckage.
Yeah. But it was a really nice moment, and it's between two, again, reasonably small characters, and it's a mixed race relationship as well as a queer relationship, these two women. So one of them is the pilot, is played by Vinette Robinson, who we've also just seen as Mary Cratchit in the BBC's very recent A Christmas Carol adaptation, which is a whole other thing to talk about. She's done some really cool stuff. She's also, quite importantly, I think she was Rosa Parks in Doctor Who. I don't think you've seen that one yet, because that's a Jodie Whittaker one.
I haven't, no.
It's so good. So that's pretty significant. And then I can't remember the other actress's name, but she's
Me neither.
been in loads of British stuff as well. So they're quite far away, and it's something that it's not, is it middle ground, would you call it? Because it's not really far away, but it's not in the foreground either. It's not focused on. It's also, this is part of a sequence where they're showing everybody relieved, they've survived, people are grieving, but they're celebrating because against all odds they've won. There's happiness or celebration, and it's part of the middle of that, and it's very clearly a romantic kiss. It's very clearly these are people who've been in a relationship for a long time, and there's a lot of relief in it. So it was small and it was subtle, and I liked it because it just felt normal and it felt like not a big thing. Yeah. But as well as that, we don't get enough of that sort of relationship being a big thing and being central. So I don't really know. I suppose there's discussions to be had, but it's a move in the right direction.
You mentioned earlier that it reminded you of that last episode of season 3 of Detectorists, where it just happens in the background.
Yeah.
And no one considers it to be this radical thing that everyone needs to reset their consciousnesses about. It's just normal for the characters. Yeah,
there's a marriage proposal in a same-sex relationship, and it's quite blurred focus because there's a whole other story with the main characters in the foreground, but it also communicates. And I think this recent Star Wars trilogy has done that really well. It communicates that all the small characters, all the non-important, non-focal characters, they have lives, they have stuff going on, they have stuff that they care about too. It rounds them out as people.
Now, interestingly, in that climactic battle where it's revealed that the Emperor has been regrowing himself, creating a new body for himself, in the bowels of this vast structure on a planet called, what is it, Exegol? Something like that?
Exegol or something.
Yeah, Exegol, yeah. It's revealed that there's a massive audience, that his throne room faces this huge auditorium. And the auditorium's packed with people wearing black robes. And at no point do you see anybody's faces. And then when the Emperor dies, the place starts to collapse, and they seem to just all instantly get killed by falling statues. That was the opposite of a faithful collective. The Emperor had a collective behind him, but it was one of, might as well have been clones of him.
They could have been, I suppose that's what you can speculate.
This is very classic American psyche stuff, where American culture is okay with collectives as long as those collectives contain highly individualized units, rather than being collectives where the differences between people are outweighed by their similarities. It's how America does collectivism in a highly compromised, highly attenuated form. We're just looking through the order of events in this, because I'm just wanted to get in my mind, what were the stages in this quest. And it started off with quite a small chase sequence. A kind of opening, we got to get a bit of information from A to B, and then that set up the beginning of a quest. And then along the way with that quest, there was spying to do, and there was sneaking around to do. There's also a few small conflicts to do, and then woven in through that was Rey's gradual awakening and constant banter between her and Kylo Ren through their FaceTime connection that they seem to have established, which has become a material connection now, which is interesting, that things can get sucked through these encounters between them, including, by the climactic battle, a lightsaber. I did wonder, why is Rey being sent to this climactic battle with 2 lightsabers? She's already got one. Luke, the spirit of Luke has given her a lightsaber. Perhaps we were genuinely being expected to figure that one out a few seconds before the characters did. Go, Rey needs to give Kylo Ren her lightsaber through their little connection.
And then it means she'll have both of them as well to battle the Emperor.
Because, you need 2 lightsabers, it seems, to properly resist someone who's killing you with finger lightning. That bit where he was sucking life out of them, the way that they indicated that visually was quite interesting, because they could have just had him use lightning, but then it wouldn't have been clear that he was taking rather than giving. So they had it was these kind of long wisps that seemed to change the outlines of their bodies as he took their life force. But then Rey was fine again. She's fine enough to fight back with those 2 lightsabers. But anyway, looking at the whole plot stages sketch of the entire film, it had a kind of really standard ramping up of tension plot arc, where you start off with a small tension moment, a bit of chase pursuit, calm down for a bit, and then you have a small action sequence, which is the one where they're on those little speeders being chased by guys on bikes. And then things go bad, the quest gets complicated a bit, and then there's another action sequence involving escaping, because there's always somebody who has to get captured at some point and has to be freed. And then a little later on there's a slightly bigger action sequence, so that was the fight between Rey and Kylo Ren on the wreckage of the Death Star. And then that leads up to the vast climactic 3rd action sequence, which is the huge space battle, which is happening above the surface of a planet. And that has to get to a point where it looks like all is lost, and then the cavalry arrives, led by Lando. And at the same time another battle has to be going on, because such a big battle like that is just too... not for us, but for the filmmakers, it's just too impersonal. So they have to have a personal battle going on as well, which was the Rey versus the Emperor, with Kylo Ren's help at the last minute battle. That is virtually identical to the plot of Return of the Jedi, and it's virtually identical to the model of how an action film goes these days. And I don't really mind. Formulaic doesn't mean bad.
Yeah.
Formulae, they exist for a reason. They fulfill functions, and loads of elements of it were done in ways that I haven't seen done before, because it's virtually impossible to do anything that's entirely new. The newness is in the way you apply an existing formula. Who Rey was, that was a surprise. How Kylo Ren turned back into Ben Organa Solo, that was a surprise. The way that the final battle in space was won, that was a bit of a surprise as well. So those things, you can do those little bits in unorthodox ways, and on the whole, no one's going to walk out going, I've seen that film before. Overall, that was a really solid... Am I damning it with faint praise? I'll do so anyway. That was a really solid piece of filmmaking, with no moment where I thought, I am just seeing a computer game. And I mean that in the literal sense of, I'm not going, that's just a computer-generated object or character or environment. Things had weight. Things had dirt on them, things had inertia, there was dust in the air, it was the VFX people have been working on it clearly the digital effects people have been working on it clearly for years. And I'd lost count of the number of different companies that were given various jobs.
It was really detailed as well, because we were pointing out, I noticed there was a depth department, so there was a team of people working only on depth in the image in the CGI. They were trying to make it as real as possible. And I think it was interesting the way they did And there was a precedent for this in earlier movies where they did the young Luke and Leia when he was training her as a Jedi.
Yeah.
It was quite a short scene, and they did it in the dark so that it just took some of the edge off the computer-ness of their faces.
They did at that point both just look like... It looked like a cutscene from a computer game. So yeah, I suppose that moment, yeah.
Especially Leia's face, Carrie Fisher's face. It was a bit like when they mocked her up in Rogue One at the very end. It was just a bit like, well, that's clearly a computer. I mean, it's really great, but it's very clearly a computer-generated face. It's not a real person's photographed face. But yeah, that was probably the only moment where it really took me out of it for a second. You know, you can see why they did it, and it was an important scene.
Yeah, I want to know so much more about the Jedi path of Leia.
I know, because it feels like there's a real gap there. There's really interesting spin-offs to have. You know, if people would accept somebody else playing Leia, then there'd be a really interesting series to do, because she did Jedi training. She clearly had the Force, and there were big plans for Leia before Carrie Fisher died. Her death has actually shaped these films into what they've become.
That moment, speaking about the way that the real life circumstances of actors impact on the content of the fictional stories based in films, that moment where Kylo Ren / Ben seems to be visited by the ghost of Han Solo, that was minutes after his mum had just died. So he was now without any surviving parents. And at that moment, for anyone to bring him back to who he was before he became Kylo Ren, it seems absolutely hopeless that it might be a surviving family member, because basically there's no one left. He's the last of that bloodline. So it seems that what the solution that was come up with was, well, okay, so Carrie Fisher died, so we can't do anything there with maybe having her ghost come and do it. Maybe we could CG a ghost from her. But then someone seems to have gone, well, should we just have someone who is in real life still alive be the ghost of somebody who in the story space is dead? Should we just get Harrison Ford to come and have a father-son chat with him? And it was one of those great things where a character comes and has a chat with a living character and then goes, but what do I know? I'm just a figment of your imagination. And what do I know? I just live in your head. The implication is, what do you mean just live in my head? You know, that's a really important thing. So just having Harrison Ford in there, it seemed to be an acknowledgement of, okay, we killed this character off, but it really would be good to have a living parent for this character now. And we kind of killed off the wrong character when we got rid of Han Solo.
Well,
so let's just bring him back in an informal way.
But it felt with Rise of Skywalker in general, they were piling in as many cameos as possible, so it would have felt like he was missing if he hadn't been there in some way.
Yes. That moment where Rey's quest to hear the voices of the Jedi finally succeeds.
You get this it was too many to keep up with, I thought.
And it was voice after voice after voice of someone who was a Jedi, just saying Jedi platitudes. And there was women's voices in there, and I thought, what we've got here is, clearly they're going to use the voices from the earlier films. But I think they're also going to be using voices from the Clone Wars TV series, from lots of Star Wars media that neither you nor I have seen. I was listening, okay, what Jedi do I actually know the voices of? And Hayden Christensen's voice was in there. Apparently Ewan McGregor's voice was in there as well, as was Alec Guinness's voice.
Yeah, Liam Neeson.
As was Liam Neeson's, but I didn't hear any of them.
Yoda, heard Yoda from Oz.
And, of course, Mark Hamill's was in there as well. But looking at this list on the internet,
a lot.
It was roughly 10 different people who were in there as the throng of Jedi. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of them as the voices of everyone who's been a Jedi in the Star Wars universe. That was one of those moments where I thought, I need to go back and watch this film again. Detail was a really strong element of this film. That couldn't be more unlike the prequels. The prequels were really squeaky, clean, and really cut down and pared back and minimalist. The scene that keeps coming to mind is when the Gungans go up against the droids in this big land battle, and it just happens in a completely green field. There's not even any trees around. Even at the point when the Gungans are losing and there's laser bolts going everywhere, it's still really clean. Everything's shiny and there's no stuff lying around. The battle gets messy. One of these kind of droid tanks keels over on its side and carves a big hole in the ground. But still, there's no stuff falling apart or people falling over. There's so little of that. And this just brought it back to the original. This is a universe with history and with weight and where it is possible for things to get ridiculously messy. And I suppose that's one way in which you showcase that you can do your CG well. Because if you create an environment where something very huge hits something else very huge and it starts to break up into thousands of tiny fragments, what you're then showing is that you've got the processing power to computer generate thousands of tiny fragments and to calculate how they're going to move, how they're going to explode from the impact point. The point where that was really clear was when one of those new generation Star Destroyers was falling into the ice on the surface of this planet, and so the Star Destroyer was disintegrating and the ice was fragmenting into big pieces as well. It was a bit show-offy in places, but if you got it, I suppose.
I felt that there were some callbacks in the cinematography and editing, so the likes of the swipes.
Wipes, yeah.
Yeah, and I felt like there was echoes in the cinematography. There were moments where it felt like the original trilogy, where they had done just some of the framings of characters. If they were off in the distance or something, the way they were walking, showing them from behind off in the distance.
And the climactic one with Rey standing silhouetted against the twin suns of Tatooine.
I thought that, yeah.
This is something which is automatically advertised by the existence of films that are loved by millions. And so, given that your audience is going to have so many of those people who are aware of the earlier bits of the franchise in it, it's in your interest to constantly signal during these new films that you're paying homage to the originals. That means then that the entire film, it risks just becoming an homage to earlier films rather than something new. But I think that was balanced quite well.
No, I think they're very much their own and they're relevant for new audience. I think they're aware that they're speaking to the past audiences, but they're also speaking to the new audiences that are going to come, because they're smaller kids now who won't be old enough maybe to see and understand these films. Are going to see them when they come on television, and they're going to fall in love with them the way you fell in love with the original ones when you were that age.
Yeah, shooty, fighty.
It's all going to happen all over again.
Let's remove ourselves from the story space. Did you notice the demographic of our fellow cinema goers today?
I was trying mostly to ignore them. They made it difficult. I think there was quite a lot of older people and there was a few young ones.
The average age was over 40.
There were some families in with not young kids, but 10 and above, something like that.
You expect films like this to be primarily attracting the young adult market, so the 16 to 25-ish market. But this is automatically, because it's such a close adherent to the original mythos, it's attracting an audience which is much stronger in the Force. It's much stronger in people who were going to the cinema 20, 30 years ago than a new franchise with this kind of content. I was kind of reminded of when I went to go and see The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. I went to see that in a packed auditorium. There wasn't a single seat missing, empty. And the average age for the audience for that was 60. It had been sold to people who were retired. And so I felt ridiculously young in that auditorium. But I can understand why. In this case, I was quite surprised that there were so few people who were in that young adult bracket.
Has been out for a week though.
And it is Boxing Day.
Yeah.
I suppose. Very few people are going to go to the cinema anyway.
Most people were shopping today. So we walked past the city centre and it was heaving and people had massive bags of stuff. But again, that's a whole other story. But yeah, I mean, the cinema was fairly busy. There was a lot of people in the bars and the cafe and stuff. Yeah, I suppose I was expecting it to be near enough sold out, but it has been out for a week and the reviews it's been really skewed. I mean, I don't know who posted it, but I saw on Twitter somebody had put up the graphics for the Rotten Tomatoes scores so far, and the critics one is really low, whereas the fan one is pretty high for approval, so I don't know how much the general public are influenced by reviews. I think there's other stuff out at the minute. I mean, I'd quite like to see Greta Gerwig's version of Little Women at some point.
Which opens today, I think.
I think so, yeah.
1917.
1917 seems like a big deal. And has there been anything else lately? I suppose last Christmas people got really hammered, but people seem to have really liked it, and it seems to have been a film that people have been going to see regardless of the reviews.
Now, interesting thing about going to the cinema at this time of year, which I'm going to call Midwinter Fest, Americans and Canadians quite widely go to the cinema on Midwinter Fest Day. Here, There's not a cinema in the country that's open
No,
on
I
that
don't
day.
think so, no.
Takings just go straight down to 0 on that day because it's a kind of special day. You know, why would anyone work on that day? You know, a few pubs and restaurants are open. That's about it. Public transport's not working. It's generally accepted people are going to be at home. Whereas what we did today is what a lot of Americans and Canadians do yesterday. It's one of the reasons why this is why films get released in the run-up to Christmas.
Yeah, before. So they have their opening weekend well before.
Yeah, it's partially because it's just a lengthy holiday season, but also partially because the cinemas do remain open throughout that holiday in the US and Canada, whereas here there is these periods of, well, no one's going to be working.
Well, we're just clinging on to having one day off a year for most people.
Yes.
It's getting encroached upon all the time. It's the sort of a release where cinemas were doing their first screening of it at midnight, the day of its release.
Yeah.
I mean, we decided to see it at an art house cinema that we like to support rather than an Omniplex, which were showing it, you know, almost constantly on several screens. So maybe that's why our screening was quiet, is people are going to see it in. Because yeah, we decided to see it there because it's in 2D, but this is not just a 3D or an IMAX experience. You can do the 4DX thing, whatever it is, the moving seats and the wind in your face and the 3D stuff.
The fact that the screen was not too full, it was like a quarter full, wasn't it?
Well, we were in the front row and I didn't really look behind.
I had a quick peek.
Yeah.
Maybe a third. That was probably good because there was some chatting.
There was a lot
happening.
of chatting.
And understandably, there was a couple of moments when good things happened, when you could hear everyone in the room go, oh.
Well, no, that's okay.
That's fine, yeah. Whereas talking.
No, that's unacceptable. Having a chat during the film, unacceptable. Shut up. Other people can hear you and it's really distracting.
That's our hard open right there. Is you going, you shut your beak.
That's what puts me off going to the cinema at all these days. I mean, I don't really have enough money to go regularly. Not as regularly as I'd like, but that's probably the main thing these days. Is I can't remember the last time I went to the cinema and just people sat and watched the film.
Then let's begin the pushback right now. Okay? I've heard people attempt to push back by simply saying, I'm going to push back on that. No, that's not pushing back. That's just saying what you're doing. Actually do it. So this is how we push back, okay? Our fellow humans who listen to this, and we know you all are, when you communicate with somebody on a touchscreen device, and you're doing so with your thumbs, you are communicating silently. And that has made it so that we're all accustomed to constantly communicating, no matter what environment we're in, because we can do so silently. Small downside to that is that when we don't have that touchscreen device with us, we're much more inclined, because we're in the habit of communicating, no matter how sonic the environment is, we're in the habit of communicating nonetheless, and so we seem widely to be much more inclined to whisper, or just to talk out loud, to the person next to us in a cinema situation, or indeed in a university lecture. And we are all really, really annoying other humans when we do this. So we need to stop and actually think about whether the environment we're in is one where talking is appropriate. Because your instinct that makes you whisper suggests that it's not an appropriate environment, is it? So
that's it.
just pass notes. I don't care.
Yeah, just wait.
Stop talking.
Just wait.
Stop talking in films. Stop talking in lectures. Because other people may just crack and kill you. And it will be their fault that they've killed you, but you will also be dead. I might have gone a bit far with
May
that.
have deserved it. No, it's...
No,
but
no
it's,
one's allowed to be dead, okay?
Yeah, like it's just, it's not okay. It really affects my mental well-being apart from anything else, because I just can't stand that sound that you hear, and you hear it over a really loud film.
That was the saving grace. You've got superhuman hearing, right? But I also do have quite good hearing, right? But the fact that it was loud meant that I could only hear the people behind us talking at some of the quieter moments, whereas you seem to
could hear it almost constantly throughout the film. It wasn't necessarily the same people. It was, I could hear it from different parts of the auditorium, but it was that, or it was fistly packets. And I just feel that when the BBFC certification screen comes on, there should be dead silence. Everything should stop. You should stop breathing at that point. When that screen comes on, the film has started. Shut up. Stop fisting packets. It's not okay.
There are ritual elements to a visit to the cinema that distinguish it from watching a film even on the most elaborate home cinema system. And there's two very important elements in IMHO. In my humble opinion, I can't use acronyms. The first one is that you go through some sort of portal. So there's usually a 2-door system to get into most cinemas, isn't there? There's the door to the corridor, and then there's the entranceway of some kind into the main auditorium. So you go through some sort of vestibule area. That, I think, is quite important to going, I'm now in a space with very specific arrangements. And the second element is that BBFC card. Now, that BBFC card, of course, its primary function is just to say, okay, just so you know, this is the rating of film you have paid to see. Last chance to leave the room, because this is what kind of content you're going to get. But it also has that other function of going, you know all those trailers and adverts that it was completely fine to talk over? Those have now finished.
Yeah.
So zip it.
Everyone can hear you. It's a moment of silence. You can be heard by everyone.
So it's not just formal, it's silent.
Yeah. If you can hear really loud noises, the loud noises need to stop because the film is starting. I mean, it's just rude anyway, but you know the music's going to start. You know that iconic soundtrack's going to come on. And as we learned, because we recently listened to an episode of Edith Bowman's soundtracking podcast from a couple of years ago that she did with Ryan Johnson about The Last Jedi, we learned from that.
Shout out to Edith, because we know that Edith is listening.
No way.
Love you, Edith.
Aw, we do love Edith. We know from Ryan Johnson that John Williams re-records the score every time. It has been a new recording of it, and if you listen carefully, and they did play sequences from it back to back from different films, there are slight differences. He doesn't change notes or anything, but he'll change what part of the orchestra is being emphasised. He might change the tempo slightly. He might give it more of a march feel. He might give it more of a battle feel. He might give it a softer feel, depending on the tone of the film.
In terms of artistic creativity, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, your box of limitations is that you have to play the same piece of music. You can't vary a note. Nonetheless, even though that creates a really small box of limitations, there's still variability permissible within that. That's brilliant. It's not something that I was conscious of, but I was unconscious of it. You know, I was unconsciously aware of it, that there was differences.
I suppose just while we're on the sound, the audio, I find the sound design really fascinating. I mean, we've already talked about those layered voices. You know, you were saying it was back to that dirty, gritty sort of world. I felt like that was coming through in the sound as well. Things were clunky, things were scratchy, things had weight because of the sound, gave them weight.
It was really busy sound.
Yeah.
I can't get out of my head that bit when the very last few seconds of the film, when Rey goes to Tatooine for some reason to go and see where Luke grew up, to bury the lightsabers, and as she's coming in, no, I don't think it's even as she's coming into land, it's just an establishing shot of Tatooine that shows some Jawas. One of them goes, Houdini! Right in the back. The weight of things like when a big gun on a ship fires, it's not what you would hear in space, it's not even what we heard in the original trilogy. There's a real boom behind it. You can feel the vibrations of that. This is something that's quite a massive technological event. There's these really big, just the gun on an X-Wing fighter, for example, firing, but that's quite a big thing, and there's crackle to it as well. That bit when the Resistance fighters get a gun on the capital ship, the flagship of the enemy fleet, when they get that gun ready and they get it to fire at the command deck of the ship, that was a really big bass sound, that gunfire.
Yeah.
The detail visually and sonically, that's one of its real strengths.
And I think the androids, their movements and their little beepy noises, their communicative noises, there's so much emotion from R2 when Leia dies. Like, that had me. I was nearly away at that one.
Did you cry at any point?
I nearly was with Chewie. I really had to fight hard not to just cry when Chewie was really distraught.
That Leia had done.
Yeah, you could really feel the grief. And that for him, that's all what we think of as his original crew. I mean, he's had a long life. He had a life before he ever met Han.
He's in the prequels as a Wookiee soldier who's up against the Republic's clone army before Luke is even born. And they do say he's over 250.
Yeah.
In this one.
There was a lot of his backstory in Solo as well, where he'd been imprisoned and they team up. And so he's had this really long life, but these people have become his family and they're all dead now.
Yeah.
But he's got this whole big new family, so he is able to celebrate, but the grief comes through him actually. It's not through any of the humanoid characters, but through him. It's the most emotive of the grief from her death. But R2, the way he reacts to it, and also the way he reacts when C-3PO has had his memory wiped and they're basically having a fight. Why did you remember me? You know, he's having a bit of a crap attack about it. You know, he's really emotive with his signs and his movements and everything.
And that's how you've learned to communicate.
It's an easier release of emotion to make those sorts of noises. You know, and then we've got this new little robot. Is it Dio?
Voiced
Dio?
by J.J. Abrams. It's almost like somebody went, what's the cutest, stupid little robot we can put into this that has absolutely no purpose whatsoever other than to just look stupid and sell toys? I know. How about a thing that's basically just a wheel?
He's really squeaky when they find him, and Ray oils him so he's not squeaky anymore, and so he's running about. He's literally running circles around BB-8.
Like a tiny dog. And BB-8 was the young whippersnapper who would run circles around R2-D2.
Yeah,
So
and BB-8's quite beaten up now, partly because Ray nearly squished him during her training.
That Ray became this really powerful figure who could accidentally destroy things was quite an important part of this film, I think, because it was the way that they showed that she was becoming an extremely badass Jedi, and also the way that they implied that her ancestry might be a bit malign.
Yeah, there might be something in her, but then it's the nuance that we all have in us. I mean, it's a bit like the Greek myths, really. It's these godlike figures are based on our own feelings, our own complexities, I suppose is the better way of putting it. We all have it in us to go a bit too far, to not know our own strength, to push a bit too hard, especially when we're angered by something or really upset, because actually she wouldn't have been able to know that she could do that if Kylo Ren, as he is at the time, hadn't pushed her to do it. He deliberately pushed her and knew that she'd be distraught at thinking that she killed Chewie when actually Chewie's safe somewhere else. He's just imprisoned. He knowingly caused her to feel that pain and to blame herself for the violent death of a friend.
The lightning coming out of Rey's fingers, that was really ominous. That's why I started to go, oh, I think I know who she's related to.
Okay. She's got that power then as well, and it's about controlling it. We haven't really talked about Poe. I don't really like Poe.
I think part of his character's purpose seems to be to have somebody who gets put in control who shouldn't be.
Yeah.
He's just about got what it takes to not get everyone killed, but he's not the kind of person who ought to be in command. And so when he's finally in command, people are calling out to him for orders and he's going, oh, I don't know, just don't die. That element to his character, I think, was interesting. But for a lot of the time, he's just this source of banter who's slightly panicky, slightly shouty about the oddness of their situation. The bit near the end where everyone's snogging everyone, or when everyone's hugging everyone, and his love interest appears, and there's a bit of acknowledgement, and he seems to suggest with his eyes, well, shall we snog too? And she just goes, no. That was a useful thing to use his character for, to have him be this cocksure, charismatic military character who is just told at certain points in the film, no. There's functions that his character is solving there, but he's also quite annoying. He's the new Han Solo, isn't he, essentially, of the franchise?
Yeah, I suppose,
To be cocksure and lovable, but also the screenwriters have decided we don't love cocksure characters.
Yeah. Because, he puts everybody in so much danger in The Last Jedi because he won't follow orders. I can never remember the name of Laura Dern's character. She's in charge when she's Vice Admiral something. She sacrifices herself. She stays on the ship. Do you remember?
Yeah. No, I don't remember the character's name. Are you on Wikipedia?
No, I was trying to IMDb. Holdo.
Alright.
There's a whole thing where she knows about something, but she feels the best thing is not to disclose it. I think, isn't there, if I remember right, there's a bit of leakage of information. There's spies, double agents, that sort of thing. isn't there? So she has to be really careful about who she communicates things to.
Yes.
Poe just doesn't trust her judgment and does his own thing anyway, and puts them all in a lot of danger.
Yeah, so I suppose he's this character who is a weapon for others to wield. And in this film, he becomes basically in charge. When it's been made really clear by the previous film that he shouldn't be. Yeah.
So it feels a bit odd, actually, that that's been the decision. So I don't know if that's on J.J. Abrams and the other screenwriter or not.
I suppose it's the way that they indicate the desperation that the resistance is under, that the people who should be middle management are suddenly in charge of the corporation.
I do feel like there's bound to be other characters that are more senior. I mean, Lando has said that he's not going to get in the field anymore, but he does that thing where he just turns up anyway.
Any film in which a character is asked to join a conflict and goes, no, I'm too old for this, that's the plant for when they will ultimately turn up and go.
And the same with, is it Nori? The person who Poe wants to be his love interest, but she's clearly not interested. Well, she is a bit, but not. She's wary of him. And it turns out that, I don't know how to feel about that, it turns out that he seems to have been a drugs runner or something.
Yeah, Spice is a nickname for drugs, in this story space. Yeah, what's her name? Zoriel Bliss, I think? We only see her eyes.
It was one of those where she's covered so much of the time. Surely that's a body double most of the time. I thought that a bit about Adam Driver as well, because he's got that Vader-like mask a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I thought, how much was Adam Driver even on the set?
Yeah.
I mean, he's had a lot of films out this past year. Busy guy. They can't afford to have actors like that around when you can't even see their faces. They're just going to have a body double in.
I want to know more about the Knights of Ren.
Yeah.
There's 6 or so followers of Kylo Ren, supposed to be his kind of lieutenants stroke bodyguards, unnecessary bodyguards, who do a few things for him during the pursuit of Rey and company. And the doing things for him just seems to involve walking around a bit. They don't do any fighting anyone. They don't capture anyone.
They look a bit mean.
Well, they're involved in the capture of Chewbacca, that's it. They're just standing around when that happens. And then Kylo Ren stroke Ben finds that he has to fight them to get to the Emperor. So their only function is just to provide some people for him to fight. And that's it. People who initially hand his arse to him until he gets hold of a lightsaber. I'm sure there was story there that had been jettisoned to get it down to time.
I felt like the thing with Janna was interesting, the way she and Finn find each other, because it turns out that she and all her crew are these former, almost child soldiers in a way.
Yeah, former First Order stormtroopers.
Yeah. Who
all mutinied as one, which was an interesting bit of collective action for a film that's really reluctantly collectivist. She says, we all just as one decided not to follow orders one day. We were told to execute some prisoners and we just didn't.
Civilians, she said, yeah. It was specifically when they were told to execute civilians. And wasn't that how it happened with Finn? He was being told to shoot people and he felt like these people have done nothing. I wonder how deliberate it is that they've racialised that in a way, because John Boyega, I mean, he's British, but he's playing somebody with an American accent. So it comes across that he's African American. It comes across that Janna is African American.
Yeah.
And these are people who have no roots. They don't know their roots because they're descended from people who were taken as slaves. That conversation with Lando, who does know where he's from, so it seems like he's an African person.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So he knows where he's come from, he knows his home, and they don't know their home. They've become these non-people, and they've been given these names that are the names given to them by their owner.
So the allusion to the African slave trade is really strong. And also that was the point where there was some indication of another sequel.
Yeah.
To do with Lando and Janna going and discovering who they are.
Having a wee adventure, because we were saying on the way home, the Resistance didn't really think that through. Where are all their adventures going to come from now? That they've fixed everything.
Yeah.
They've quashed the order. Where do they go from here? I mean, how do they establish a new society? What do they do for kicks? What's going to happen? Because this has been their whole life for such a long time.
Well, I'd like to make a prediction. The original Star Wars film, which of course was planned as a standalone film,
Yeah.
that original film, it wasn't called Episode 4 at the time, it was just called Star Wars. It came out in 1977, which was the bicentenary of the Declaration of Independence. America absolutely adores refighting symbolically the War of Independence. Because there's no more morally justifiable position to take in a war than one where you are fighting for freedom from an oppressive power.
Yeah, an
that's
empire,
faceless
a colonist,
and,
an imperial force. Yeah.
In telling these stories, American fiction in whatever format gets to tidy up the past a little bit, make it so that, as in Mel Gibson's Patriot, the abolition of slavery is just around the corner rather than about 80, 90 years away, that they're not actually behind Britain where the abolition of slavery is concerned. So there's lots of tactically tidying up the past that goes on. So we can basically expect this to crop up a lot in American fiction. Now, looking specifically at Star Wars, well before any of these sequel films were even put into production, the events immediately following the destruction of the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi, they had been elaborated in fiction in the form of novels and comic books and computer games, well before the end of the 20th century. And so I'd actually read and even played through subsequent events, subsequent conflicts. And what basically happened in the 30, 40 years immediately succeeding the events of the original trilogy is that the remnants of the Empire banded together and became a new rump, which began to establish a new empire. It wasn't called the First Order at the time, but that was the basis for what became the First Order in these sequels. Essentially what happened even before the early 90s, even before the end of the 90s, was what happens when you defeat the Empire? Well, about 10 years later, the Empire will just come about again and try and crush you under its boots again. Essentially, that's what's just happened in the whole trilogy we've just seen. Is what happens when you defeat the Empire? Well, this thing called the First Order arises. It's some of the remnants of the Empire. It gradually grows again to become the Empire. The Emperor reveals he's not dead after all. The Empire's back again. We're back to exactly where we were in Return of the Jedi. And of course what Return of the Jedi did was basically just refight at a larger scale what had happened at the end of the original Star Wars film. So if you got original Star Wars film, then Return of the Jedi. Yes, I know that there was another film in between, but that was leading up to Return of the Jedi. So, original Star Wars film, it refought the War of Independence. The original Star Wars trilogy, it refought the War of Independence. This entire trilogy that we've just had now, it refought the War of Independence. So, I predict that the next trilogy we're going to get in the Star Wars franchise will refight the War of Independence. Does that sound like a reasonable prediction? It's what this franchise is for, I think. I mean, it partly refought the Second World War, the original Star Wars film, that is. It partly dramatised the Cold War as well. So, the evil empire was simultaneously the British Empire, the Third Reich, and the Soviet Union, all kind of rolled into one. One or more of those is going to crop up again as the thing, a resistance, a plucky resistance of scrappy, mainly flying people that they're going to have to go up against. Seems like that's the way it goes. And Rogue One, solo a Star Wars story, they'll thrust off in slightly different directions. But the Force, unless that's being put to bed, if the Force is going to crop up again, it's going to be along the lines of this is the thing that we use right and that the evil empire uses wrong.
It did feel with what happened with all the lightsabers of the Skywalker dynasty, I suppose. Ben threw his in the ocean on that planet, wherever they were, where the old Death Star was.
Yeah.
Rey has buried Leia and Luke's together on, is it Tatooine or is it? I got a planet right. Which is interesting because Leia, of course, didn't grow up there, but then we find out that they're twins and all that.
And that her grandmother was from there.
I suppose that they both come to her in a ghostly vision as she's doing it, because she's become herself.
Interesting ghostly vision, which is indistinguishable from a mirage.
So she's in the desert. It's as if they've given her a blessing, because it's that moment where this random woman has... a random single woman left on a planet.
Probably credited as random single woman in this.
Who has... asked her who she is. She hasn't seen anybody for a long time. Who are you? I'm Rey. And earlier in the film she has said, I'm just Rey, I don't have a family name. Now she rejects her actual family name and takes on the Skywalker family name because it feels like she's been adopted by Luke and Leia.
Yeah.
But also, maybe it's a bit like an implied marriage thing with Ben.
Yeah, like she's taken his name. I was expecting her to just say, yeah, my name is Ray Palpatine. That name is not dirty anymore.
Well, yeah,
I've
because
taken it back.
you can change a name. You can change what a name means, can't you?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm called Blair, for instance.
That's a name that could do with a bit of cleansing.
I suppose coming back to the fandom thing, I think, speaking as a non-fan, do you know, it was a fun movie to watch. Emotionally, it took me with it a lot of the time. The action sequences were fantastic. There are bits of the plot where I thought that could have gone through another 1 or 2 edits at least. But it's an action movie, what am I expecting? Not that action movies... I think there's some really fantastic action movies out there that are pretty tight, to quote
9-9!
9-9. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and wind your necks in. Speaking out to all those people on the internet who are being really mean, because there's no need.
Yeah, a good 3.5 million people were involved in making this film.
I know, it's amazing.
Communal efforts can be a bit scrappy.
It's just amazing how many people go into making it.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I think our time is up. Just to let people know what Dr. Blair's labour is. The counter on our recorder currently says 1 hour, 38 minutes and 55 seconds. You will get this down to under an hour in the edit, won't you?
I don't know, we'll see.
You will get it. How do you say?
Tweet.
Lovely.
Thank you. You've been listening to Audiovisual Cultures with me, Paula Blair, and my very special guest, Dr. Andrew Shail. This episode was recorded, edited and produced by Paula Blair. The music is Common Ground by Airtone, licensed under a Creative Commons Non-Commercial 3.0 license, and is available for download on ccmixter.org. If you like what we do, please help us meet production and distribution costs with a regular payment to liberapay.com/PEI Blair, or make a one-off donation to paypal.me/PEI Blair. Any contributions are massively appreciated. Episodes are released every other Wednesday. Subscribe on your chosen app so you never miss a new release. Visit audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com or follow AV Cultures Pod on Instagram and AV Cultures on Twitter and Facebook for more information and useful links. Thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.